All right. So I'm so excited, Cain, that you are here to join us for our Real Eyes, Realize podcast. And so before we move into the podcast officially, what I'd like to do is start us off with a little grounding invocation. So I simply invite you to soak in the words. If you'd like to close your eyes, feel free, feet flat on the ground, and just feeling into that essence of arriving and being here now. So we thank you so much for this blessed day. We are so grateful to be alive and seeking the truth that reveals itself in the eyes of this beautiful beholder today, as we come together to express love and service and compassion in action. We feel everyone has something special to share in this world, and we are so grateful for Cain Carroll to be with us today to share his story and the sparks that inspired his actions in creating ripple effects, actualizing love in this world. Let us all be inspired by his story and light in us a lantern for a cause that matters deeply to us and to our world. So today we will value progress over perfection and know that we are guided and protected on this journey of service and love with our human family. For the sake of our precious short lives, may we be leaders who care. May we be leaders who act mindfully for the greater good of generations to come. And may we listen intently without the need to fill space with sound, and seek to understand rather than postulate how to interject. To our masters and teachers, our guides and guardians, please guide us to learn the lessons of living from our hearts and allowing the ripple effect of goodness, inspiration, hope, and courage to flow from our words into the positive actions supporting our families, communities, and this beautiful world we've been gifted to occupy. We hear your call to express beauty in this world, and we thank you. Aho.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome. So is there anything that you would like to offer as well in the spirit of grounding and arriving?
I think you covered it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. So we welcome today this amazing, amazing guest, Mr. Cain Carroll, and I wanted to give a little introduction of Cain as we move into this interview. And thank you, Cain, so much for being here as part of our Real Eyes, Realize podcast. So Cain Carroll is a wild mystic, and he is a rebel spiritual teacher whose embodiment of radical presence and teachings on awakened consciousness offer a fresh and much needed blueprint for the new humanity we yearn for. He is the architect of the Clearbright teachings that invite seekers back into intimacy in the sacredness of life. And he's the co-creator of Innate Medicine, a new paradigm in whole person healing with Josefa Rangel, MD. So I wanted to just invite Cain, thank you for being here, and so excited to see you and hear from you. And for our listeners, so excited that you have an opportunity to meet Cain Carroll. And I'd like to offer up, first of all, let me know if I just did not pronounce your partner's name appropriately. So do correct me if that is the case. Maybe it's Josefa. And also, I just wanted to hand over the baton to you to have you tell us a little bit about your story. Kind of where have you come from, where and what has brought you to where you are here today?
Yeah. So just first, so it's Josefa, Josefa Rangel. Thank you. Yeah. Well, so my journey with all of this starts in childhood. The first with my mother, the first kind of memory that I can recall in terms of like the beginning of spiritual cultivation and spiritual path. Um, I was with my mom in the bathroom. I must have been 4.5 or 5 years old. And we were in the bathroom together, brushing our teeth, getting ready for bed. And I looked in the mirror, and I still remember very clearly looking in the mirror and thinking, that looks strange. And I was talking about my own reflection. And like the face that I saw in the mirror, the image I saw in the mirror was different from the way I felt inside. I had kind of remembered myself differently. And later, through dreams and things and meditations, I remembered myself as much darker brown than this skin, and different versions of myself. I didn't understand that in that moment, but what I said was, I pointed in the mirror and I said, "Mom, that's not me. And she kind of laughed and she said, yeah, that's right. And I was like, well, then who am I? And then she laughed again and she was like, well, that's what you're going to need to figure out.
Mm.
And it planted this seed. Of course, I hadn't been exposed to self-inquiry practices. I hadn't, met Vedic practices yet, but of course, many traditions, even the Koan tradition in Chan and Chinese Zen, um, have so much value around this idea of that question and this kind of yearning to understand, what is this existence? What is this expression of beingness that we call I? So that planted a deep seed in my heart mind, and my mom continued to be my primary spiritual teacher through my life until she passed. Um, so that kind of planted a seed, and then time moved forward, and then the next kind of landmark was I was interested in martial arts and I was interested in Asian spiritual practices, and I didn't know really how to access that. And there was a Japanese cultural center in our town, and they were giving judo classes for kids. So I told my parents I wanted to try that, and they brought me to the Japanese Cultural Center. And at this point, now I'm 13, and my mom and I had many conversations about spirituality and meditation, and she had taught me basic body-based meditation that she always practiced. She would practice in the middle of the house. She would practice on the couch in the middle of everything. And I remember asking her, isn't it distracting to you? She would say, Cain, I'm going to meditate. And I would be playing, video games or running around or getting my skateboard or whatever. And she said, no, it's not a problem for me if you're just doing whatever you're doing. There's no distractions. Everything's included.
Mm.
Again, it was like a seed that went in. I didn't understand exactly what that meant. A seed went in that I remembered much later. And around that time, I started going to the Japanese Cultural Center and studying judo. But of course, that culture around the dojo was influenced very much by Japanese culture in general, but by Zen practice as well. So we bowed to elders. We would practice meditation. The women would do flower arranging. The older, like the grandmothers of the community, would do flower arranging for events and things, and I was interested in that.
Mm.
So I just started soaking in all of this, like all the conduct related to spiritual cultivation, taking our shoes off before entering the dojo and treating the mats like sacred. And when you enter into the space of the dojo, you bow as you walk through the threshold, right? So the teachings were not explicit in the way of verbal, but they were a part of the culture and they soaked in. Like I intuitively understood space is sacred, and you bow to it as you enter and exit that space, and elders are sacred and you bow to them and relate to them in a certain way, and male female dynamics and teamwork dynamics, like male female dynamics existed off of the mat in terms of like, it's very traditional in a way, like open the door. But on the mat, I was young, it was totally fine to go full out and fight judo, male, female. There were no gender rules. And all of the women there who were practicing were much more experienced and advanced than I was. So they all kicked my butt in judo, which was fantastic.
Oh, I love it. I mean, talk about a practice of humility, at an early stage, and just not seeing gender as anything different than maybe the skin that we wear, right?
No, I mean, I remember this one woman, Tracy, and I was 13, right? And she was older in high school. And she had been doing judo since she was a little kid. And she was really sweet and helpful. And she would always teach me. But when it came to randori, when it came to like open gym, fighting, she would just throw me all over the place, like without any, like what she wouldn't hold back at all. And it was amazing because it taught me a ton about the power of spirit and the power of training. And I, as a 13-year-old, I couldn't understand like how she was so much faster and stronger. And, I was pretty strong and wiry and all of that. But so it really taught me that there's no like free lunch. You have to train. You really have to put your time in and practice. And so I did. And I did that, all through, junior high and high school.
Absolutely.
And that gave me kind of the basis for, later, which would be, studies of yoga, Buddhism, Taoism, in a more kind of directly spiritually based cultivation and health cultivation. But it was really the martial training that gave me the basis and the discipline to be able to really engage with some of those other practices. And when a teacher would tell me, you have to do this, 10,000 times, I would just do it. I wouldn't question, because that's how it was, with judo and with wrestling. You had to get up before school, a couple hours before school, and train, and go after school and train. And it was very competitive. We were training for tournaments, which was what I needed as a young person.
Mm.
Later in life, I came to kind of go the opposite direction from competition with, yoga and all of these things, like to really de-emphasize the interest in trying to do it like anybody else.
Mhm.
I had to go through some period of dealing with injuries from the martial arts. And I had some injuries from yoga, because the little interim between martial arts training and competing and finding yoga asana practice, there was some hard lessons in learning how to be gentle,
Mhm.
how to not, push, and how to not use that kind of like martial intensity with practicing asana and pranayama. So I had to learn how to heal my own body
Mm.
through those practices, because there were quite a few injuries that I had. I broke ribs and really tweaked my neck and lower back. And,
Mm.
um, in judo, you're trying to choke out the other opponent and arm bar them. And, it's
Yeah,
ritualized kill, right? So it can be pretty hard on the body.
absolutely. Well, it
So,
sounds like too the learned competitiveness, be at your best, your devotion to the trade also can come through in so many areas, right? Whether or not it's yoga asana, even deep philosophy training, like how do I get to the truth? How do I get to be the best? So I love the element that you said in that space between, like, the lessons were through life lessons, experiential lessons. The body is here to say, wait a minute, you also compassion for yourself, compassion for others in this process. And so it sounds like that was something that you listened to just as much as you listened to the other teachings.
yeah, it was interesting, because on one hand, you're going full power, on the mat, and you're not holding back at some level, but you're holding back something that would actually harm the other person or harm yourself, but it's a fine line. And people did get hurt. And I'll just share one story, because it taught me a lot about how to understand our own injuries and how to understand our own power in relationship to our body and other people. There was a kind of tournament that we would do it was a team tournament. So a lot of the tournaments were individual tournaments. And in that way, you would play against a person of a similar weight and a similar ranking.
Yeah.
But in a team tournament, there would be like 5 people, and the 5 people would line up against the other 5 people. And so there could be a large difference in weight or ranking depending on who all was on the team, right?
Sure.
So in this particular team, I ended up fighting against a person who was much older than me, much higher ranking, and bigger and stronger than I was. And I was studying judo and wrestling, both freestyle and collegiate wrestling. So him and I, got on the mat, and I could quickly tell he was way better than me at judo. But in wrestling, you can change your body position, and you can do other things on the mat that might give you an advantage versus like standing and just going like toe to toe with judo. So I started utilizing some of those techniques, and it turned out that he came into my legs, and I did this move where you pick the person up and you turn them upside down and you bring their head toward the mat, and at the last minute you use your forearm and you hit the back of their head so it tucks their chin under so they don't hurt their neck, but they land on their back.
Mm-hmm.
They land on their back, you instantly win the match. He wasn't familiar with how to fall in that move because it's not really done in judo as a wrestling thing. And he put his arm out, his body, all his body weight came down on one arm, and these two bones broke and actually came out of the skin. It was a really bad injury.
Ooh, gruesome.
And I immediately just felt like the horror of like, I didn't want to hurt this person, and I had never hurt someone before in that way, intentionally or non-intentionally. And the etiquette in judo is that I had to kneel just away from him on the mat and like go completely silent, just sit in seiza, like in front of him.
Mm.
And like, you're just supposed to like let it happen. Like,
Right. No emotion, neutrality.
and inside I'm just like exploding. I'm crying. I'm just, I feel horrible. But it was like to give this person space to have their own experience, and then the medics come and they do their thing. But it's like it was like to not take away the spaciousness of his own experience, but to be there present with him in it, but to take away nothing or add nothing. It was extremely difficult to do that. And it made a really strong impression on me, one, on how to be more potentially careful of other people, strange as that sounds in a martial arts tournament, but it's like, how do you interact with somebody in a way where you're caring for them and caring for yourself and still, winning the match, so to speak? How do you give space to someone's experience without either like flooding them with your own emotion or becoming aloof? It was one of those moments, like a threshold lesson I was in high school, for a young person, that had a huge impact on my interest in martial arts. In fact, it was one of the reasons why I started moving away from martial arts. But yeah, the teaching on that is like one of these, meditative. It was an expression of meditative practice in a way where you're allowing space for even the most intense emotion or physical experience to have the room to be able to billow forth and to be able to embrace it and accept it and allow the energy behind it room to move.
Do you remember? I mean, it sounds deeply respectful, and for you to be in that ability to have your own sense of emotions and also be in that space of watching and allowing the space for the experience of your opponent. Do you remember after, did you process it in your own way, like with your mother or with a coach, or was that kind of held inside? Curious.
Yeah. I mean, I processed it with my coach because I'm a pretty passionate person, and I was just like, Sensei, like, why did you make me do that? Why did you, he told me what to do, and I, like, in that culture, you do it, right? It's very similar to the, guru kind of relationship, like, and then you can ask questions later. And he just said, that like for you to kind of like go and try to like attend to him, or for you to be crying, or it would put the attention on you. And in the culture of the martial arts, and in the culture of, Zen, and in the Japanese culture, that would be considered self-centered. Like in that moment, it's not about you. What happened.
Yeah.
And you saying I'm sorry 1,000 times, or it just comes off as a kind of self-centered and self-interest. So you like, the action happened, and then you have to deal with the reality of it, like without embellishments. And
amazing teachings, huh? Amazing.
it was like yeah, it was so difficult for me to get that now. I mean, so I did it because I respected the tradition and I respected him. But again, it was one of these moments where a seed goes in, and I couldn't comprehended all that was there in that teaching, and how to apply it, how to apply that in a way that's dynamic and not just regurgitating some kind of fixed
Yes.
teaching from a moment, that was 30 plus years ago. So yeah, that was
It's amazing. Well, Cain, what I love about you, and we've worked together, co-hosting different sessions, whether or not it's around breath work or qigong. But what I love is your ability to go deep into whether or not it's the training or the knowledge, and also the integrative factor that you have of how do we bring this to an experiential sense of knowledge? How do we integrate even what might be disparate worlds, Western medicine and Eastern medicine, for the attempt of looking at whole body healing. So I'm curious, when you think about that and the depth of the training and the learning that you've done, can you tell us too a little bit about kind of what brought you to where you are today with the work that you're doing in the world? I'm so curious.
Yeah, well, I mean, the meeting place of these influences, right? So after that period, because of the injuries and also the desire for deeper internal cultivation, for deeper internal spiritual development, I wasn't finding, my appetite for that wasn't satiated within what I was finding in the martial arts world. So I started into the yogic practices.
Mm.
And my first exposure to that was with the Sikh community in Arizona. So studying Kundalini yoga, I would spend time with the Sikhs where they were living, and there were a couple that were coming onto campus at Arizona State. And so I got to spend a lot of time with two teachers in particular.
Mm.
So that brought me really deep into the meditative breathing Kriya aspect of movement practice, physical practice with an internal focus on energetics. So I was very hungry for that. And I was using that to heal some of the injuries from martial arts. I was using it to work with some of this yearnings within myself to heal aspects of what is difficult for me in society. Racism, sexism, violence, like ever since I was a little kid, these things really, really affected me.
Mm.
Wherever I would see them in society and experience those things in my own life and school, they would affect me really deeply in a way that I felt something this doesn't feel harmonious to the world I want to live in.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to find a way to work with these things within myself in a way that I feel I could change something about that in the world. So all of those things were,
Yeah.
tied in together. During college, I went and did a study abroad program in Mexico. I lived in Cuernavaca for a semester, and by that time I was already practicing deeply meditation and yoga, and I was interested to see if I could find some of that spiritual culture there. So I was able to meet and study with some curanderas there, around the Tepoztlan area in the mountains, and that further fueled my interest in my journey, because now I'm starting to see that, wow, these traditions come from all over the planet, and there's this core of teachings and powerful lineage from all.
Mm.
Now I've got exposure to Chinese martial arts, Japanese martial arts, Zen, a Kundalini thread tradition from India. I still haven't traveled to India yet. And now pre-Columbian spiritual culture from Mexico.
Mm.
So when I went back to school, I now wanted to go, and my interest in traveling to Asia was growing.
Of course.
So now it's like my eyes are starting to be set on Asia. I'm a college student, so I don't have much money. So it was during Christmas time, I think it was my junior year, that I learned about the courier flights, where essentially you pay $300 and you pick three different cities in the world, like your top choice, second and third choice. And you can't bring any luggage with you. And they use your luggage space to ship cargo.
Ah, no kidding.
Right. And there was a database of the different companies that were doing this. So I chose Bangkok as my first choice. I wanted to go to Thailand and get exposed to Thai Buddhism. And then you just give a bunch of dates, and then they call you and say you have a flight, and you get like 3 days notice.
Love it.
Got a call, and I had 3 days notice to get ready to go to Bangkok. And I had like a few $100s in cash, and that's all I could scrape together. And it was like break during college. So I flew to Thailand on this courier flight. Somebody meets you on the other side, and they check off your thing, and you just have a carry-on.
Right.
And so I traveled around Thailand for a while, going to temples and studying with Thai Buddhist monks, and learning the Vipassana practices, and just spending time by myself and in these temples, practicing and staying. And that again planted another seed. It felt like a kind of going home, like a kind of
Mm,
familiarity that was different from yoga, different from Japanese Zen, a kind of softness and a kind of sweetness that's there with, Southeast Asian
mhm.
culture and the Thai people and the food and studying cooking. And so this kind of planted more seeds connected to healing, cooking, meditation, and the Vipassana, based aspect of the practice, really
Yeah,
working on focusing the mind. Um, so that,
beautiful.
yeah, by the time that trip happened, I was getting close to finishing college. It had kind of completed like a package of different pieces that I knew after college I really wanted to devote my life to learning more and more about all of those pieces. 'Cause
Absolutely.
all of that while, trying to be a college student too, but my heart was in all of that and not really in the classroom.
I totally hear you. And you know what I love is, first of all, your quest for adventure and travel. And it's like, I'm going to figure out a way. Like, who knew about those cargo flights? It sounds almost like the military flights that go on. I love that. I'm just glad that they didn't put you in a shipping container and just give you a little space for air.
Yeah, my parents were glad they weren't shipping contraband. They were like, "You're gonna go to a foreign country and people are using your checked bag space to ship something you don't even know what it is."
It's a little funny. And at the same time, like you knew, and it sounds to me when you talk about feeling like you are home, the home is that place in the heart where you know. That's what I'm sensing from what you have to say. And the quest that you have had and the opportunity you've had to be exposed to so many different traditions, each of them gifting you and inviting you with this deep sense of knowledge that all goes to some universal truth. So no matter what language it's in, what culture it comes from, that's my understanding. Is that about right?
Yeah, yeah. There's a kind of inner knowing, a kind of heart that pulls forward, and it has always felt to me that I'm like navigating with like a soft focus, we might say. I don't exactly know what's going to happen next, and I don't have like a very strict plan of what's gonna unfold when I get there. That's kind of been how I traveled in all of these ways. There's something that brings me to a place, and then I can sense that there's more, and I'm navigating, being pulled by it. And that's how I have met all of my teachers. I didn't know that judo was connected to Zen and connected to flower arranging and connected to this conduct training. I was just pulled by like one piece of it. But when I met my sensei there, Mike Noriega, he taught me so much about life, that I didn't know that's what I was like seeking. So yeah, as I finished, and so that the next piece happened, my feeling was that when I finished college, I wanted to go for a year to Central and South America.
Mm,
I wanted to, again, I had this sense that the roots underneath Buddhism, and at this point I hadn't studied so much Taoism, but I'd been exposed to Taoist practice a little bit, but more the Indian yogic practices, that the roots of all of those practices were animistic. And I wouldn't even have used that term back then. I probably would have said the roots of those I sensing are shamanic, are kind of pre-Vedic in Indian culture, are pre-classical in Chinese culture, predate Buddhism in Buddhist culture. But I didn't know exactly where I would find that. I didn't think to go to Asia for that. I just knew that I had tasted it a little bit when I lived in Cuernavaca and that it was there.
Mm.
So I went looking in Central America and South America and went from southern Mexico overland all the way down to Argentina. Um, so I met shamanic teachers in Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, um, and interestingly, I met Taoist teachers in some of those places as well.
Oh,
Um,
amazing.
yeah, and so that started my journey into animistic shamanic practices, which of course do predate classical yogic practices and predate things like Tai Chi and modern Qigong by numerous centuries, right? And share the common roots that we could say have given rise to these cultures which have a chi-based or prana-based worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm starting to touch into what I really was seeking and where I felt that I didn't fit well with the modern way of seeing the world, a reductionistic, mechanistic way of seeing the world. Again, I didn't know that that's what it was. I just knew there was a rub there that just I could never feel comfortable, within that. And so as I started touching into these ways of relating to everything of the natural world as alive and sacred, it was like, okay, I found my people. I found my view. I found the vision within which I can understand the world in the way that has felt native to me since I was a kid. And in that way, it was funny because I thought I was going to study like apprentice with shaman, and I did a little bit, but I ended up apprenticing with Taoists in Latin America. And
Wow, no kidding. Who
who knew?
knew, right?
One teacher, he was from Ecuador, and one parent was Ecuadorian and one parent was Chinese. So he grew up in China and Ecuador. And so he bridged classical Chinese medicine, Qigong, Taoist practices, and pre-Columbian native Ecuadorian shamanism, herbalism together. And I got really sick in Ecuador. So I had to go to him as a
A
patient.
patient. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll just share this story in a visual way because I got really sick. I probably had some form of Giardia or some gut, micro.
Sure.
I didn't go to hospitals. I don't know what the microorganism was, but, vomiting, diarrhea, all of that. I'm staggering through this little town in Ecuador, looking for where I might get medical care. And I see this door, and over the door is like an old rusty round piece of metal hanging over the door. And it's kind of like blowing in the wind. And I'm like delirious, and everything's like in slow motion. And I look up and I see that it's the yin yang symbol.
Interesting.
And I'm like, what is the yin yang symbol doing over a doorway in Ecuador? Like where am I again? So I'm like, I have to knock on this door. I knock on the door. And this guy opens the door and he's like, "You're sick." And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "You need to come inside,"
Oh my goodness.
in Spanish. And so I go inside and he takes my pulse. And I quickly understand this person's a Chinese medicine doctor, but he looks Latin, but he looks Chinese. And so he just says, "You just lie down, lie down." And he gives me acupuncture
Mhm.
and writes me an herbal prescription. And he says, "Come back tomorrow." And so I feel a little bit better. I come back tomorrow and he's like, I'm going to teach you.
Oh,
And he says, "Okay, every day I'm going to give you acupuncture, give you herbs. We're going to go to the market. I'm going to teach you how to shop and how to cook for yourself. And I'm going to teach you Qigong."
wow.
And I was like, I'm staying in this village. Like,
Yep.
whatever I was looking for, this is it. And so I just stayed there. And it turns out that town is Baños, where the hot springs are in Ecuador. And so I had the hot springs there, my cooking teacher, Qigong teacher, Chinese medicine teacher, and he's also teaching me about, the local traditions as well. And it's all in Spanish.
Of course.
And I try to pay him, and he was like, no, you just teach me English.
Oh, man, reciprocity right there.
So this was also something that was really dear to my heart, this feeling energy between people, that everything's not commerce, that it's about the exchange of it. So I stayed with him in his house and got to study. And the things that I learned from him ended up being the basis for the Pain-Free Joints program that I developed and made a DVD about. That was the basis for all of that stuff, all of those ways of moving the joints in a very circular and round way to heal arthritic pain and injuries. I learned from Liu Shan.
Gosh, that's amazing. This is the whole thing of when the student is ready, the teacher is there, right? Who knew?
And without, and then I'll just like make a connection to this like time of the pandemic, right? It's like, well, I'm in intimate relationship with things I can't see that impact my immune system, right? All of our immune system wouldn't exist without those microorganisms. With our relationship that we have with them over time, we develop our immune system, right?
Yeah.
So here I am in relationship with some microscopic organisms I got from eating something that, was different from my body. And without those microscopic organisms, would I have met Liu Shan? I don't know. I might have just cruised through that town and searching for what I thought I was looking for. It's because of that I stopped in that town.
Yeah. You can see the connection of all, like nothing happens to us. It all happens for us, right? If we're just quiet enough to listen and watch and see that.
Right.
So incredible. So
I mean, it's one of the principles now with Dr. Rangel and I, we see illness as often an entry point into a full-scale engagement with our life. Many of the patients that we work with at Innate Medicine and the work that we do, we see often that without this provocation of the health condition or the dis-ease, that person wouldn't have been called as deeply into engagement with their life, and they discover some healing that's different than just getting rid of pathology. It's a deep kind of transformative process. And that has certainly been the case in my life. Injury and illness have been big guides for me to find, ways of engagement. So
absolutely. The entry, the gateway, the door in, right, to a deeper sense of knowing. This is actually a great opportunity, I think, to tell us a little more about what it is that you're doing with Dr. Rangel, with Innate Medicine. Tell us more about even what you're seeing like through the pandemic as themes and patterns. I think our listeners would be really interested in that.
Yeah, so innate medicine is based on the principle that healing is an intrinsic aspect of the natural world, implicit in all living things. And that's important because if it isn't inherent within the human body and within a redwood tree and within a caterpillar, then it has to be acquired from outside of itself. And of course, nothing else in the natural world is acquiring the power to heal and regenerate outside of itself. Yes. It interacts with its environment to find resources to support that within which it has inherently, constantly arising within itself. We can see that when if you cut off a tree limb because you're trimming a tree, the tree will heal over, it will scab over that area, and it will develop over years a healed area, and maybe even develop some other aspect of advantage for itself to thrive based on that. If we cut ourselves by accident, the skin will grow back together, even if we had to get stitches, right? The stitches just bring the two pieces of skin closer together. And then how is it, by what power do those cells regenerate and grow back together? Well, that is the innate medicine within our body, the constancy of healing and regeneration. So we organize the practice around how to support that within the individual. And there are things that can inhibit, and there are things that can support and even accelerate that power of healing within us. So we utilize 9 different areas of human life that we call the 9 petals. And I can bring up a diagram of that.
Yeah, please do. And for
that.
those listening, we'll have a screenshot available in our resource hub. And we'll also do a little video snippet on this because it's really nice to be able to see a visual as well.
So let me bring that up. Can you see that?
I see it. Yes, beautiful.
Okay. So the idea is something like the centerpiece is this brightness, this aliveness. So I developed this to essentially be the basis of the teaching of what we call the Clearbright teachings. The Clearbright represents the masculine and feminine aspects of being, or yin-yang aspects of being, solar lunar aspects of being, inherently unified, shining aliveness out into all directions. That represents the flower. So this flower is our human beingness at all levels. And this light in the center is that which is innate within us and within all things. So for human beings, we have a physical experience. That's this apple with the heartbeat and the weights. We have physical embodiment aspect of our being that needs attending to, and dis-ease or illness can show up primarily in that realm. Above that, the head with the gears represents the movement of thoughts. This is our mental experience, our relationship to thoughts and thought forms. Above that, the heart with the hands is our emotional experience. And as we get into these first 3, physical, mental, emotional, if we track the petal back down to the center, we see that the petals are all overlapping at varying degrees, but they overlap completely at the center. They all share the same source. And so although at the tips of the petals, we could look at these as different, and they are different expressions, as we get deeper into them, we realize that the categories are not exclusive, they're inclusive, right? And so with mental, emotional, well, there is a difference between thoughts and emotions, but what is it? We're not exactly sure, but we can play with those 2 aspects to find how we can support our emotional experience, mental experience, and physical experience in such a way that feeds that innate medicine, that light at the center.
I almost see it like you could look at it, individually. It's almost like you shine a different light on that aspect, but at its source, they're all integrative. So the looking at the relationship between all is really important as well.
Correct. And so that, again, the reason why I wanted to say, like, this is the centerpiece, is the very basis of the Clearbright teachings. The first principle of the Clearbright teachings is that separation has no reality to it. There's actually no such thing as separation at the level of ultimate reality. At the level of apparent reality, there's individuation, there's embodiment, there's thoughts, there's emotions, but those things aren't actually separate from the universal tissue of life. They're aspects of that which is never separate. Right. So whether we're looking at the 9-petal flower of an individual to try to understand what's happening with them in the clinic, to try to help them work with fibromyalgia or insomnia or cancer or depression, we understand we have to look at all of the aspects of the individual to be thorough. But what we're realizing is that all of those are actually not separate aspects of one experience. And that individual, just like if this were a flower, is not separate from the ground within which this flower grows. This individual isn't separate from the land, from the air, from all of the other human beings. And so we work with those 2 aspects at once, the individuation and the non-separation. At the same time, we're working with both of those.
It's so beautiful. And I feel like I cut you off from after the 3rd petal. So I'm so anxious to hear more. What's number 4?
Yeah, so the next three, these three over here, this one is sexuality, the heart with the two people, looking at each other. This has to do with our sexual experience. The idea is that there's individuation and there's non-separation. So drew the diagram so that there's two in one. And part of that is because the idea is our sexuality begins with our relationship with our own experience of sexual energy, right? And remember, these petals are us in the center, you could say, as the light of awareness, expressing out and relating to an aspect of our humanness. Sexuality is an aspect of our humanness that we're our first primary partner. And I mean, like, internally, even before we become sexually active as young people, we're in a relationship with an energetic that is inherently connected to our ability to thrive. Right. So here at the center, reproductive energy is regenerative energy. Beautiful. So that's very important for our healing and our thriving. The next one down, the three people kind of giving a big hug to the earth. This is the relational petal. And this has to do with all aspects of relatedness, relationships with our coworkers, with our family members, with our community members, relationships with our partners, romantic partners, sexual partners, business partners. It's relatedness in and of itself, the contact point of how we engage our connectivity with life. And then the next one down with the sack of money has to do with resources, access to resources, whether those are financial, physical, real estate, land, even human resources, you could say, connects very closely, obviously, to relational. And it's resources that allow us back to the center to express that which we truly are. Relationship to our resources can confuse that which we actually are, or it can support that which we actually are. So kind of, again, you and I have a shared history with yoga. So we could use that term here, like, what's the yoga of our relationship with resources, right? So that's right livelihood kind of ideas and more. And then the next three are the creative petal. That's the palette and the musical notes. And it has to do with how we express our creative energy in relationship to the other 8 petals. It's not just artistic creation, like making music and making art or writing poetry or whatnot, as it can be those things, but it's our creative expression in relationship with all of the other petals. How does it integrate into the rest of our life?
It could even be creating an amazing meal that the family shares or something to that effect.
Correct. Yeah, culinary. And so that and I want to say that that's important because any of these petals can become an attempted refuge to try to find space from our suffering.
Say that again.
Any of these petals could be a place where we try to put all of our attention and energy to run to get away from, to avoid where it is that we have pain or suffering. For example, I'll use the creative and the physical. And we see this a lot in the clinic, and I see this a lot. I saw it with myself, and I've seen it with many of the people I've worked with. Okay, let's say somebody has a high capacity for athletic excellence, a marathon runner or a cyclist. They could use overindulgence of that aspect of life to run away from emotional or relational pain. Like when I'm on my bike and I'm 100 miles in, and like that, I'm getting those, those hits of happy hormones from, from exertion. I don't feel any pain. Is that person running away from their emotional pain and using physical overengagement to do that? Possibly. I see that a lot. Over here, I feel amazing when I stay up till 3 in the morning writing music, and I don't feel any of my, let's say, relational pain, relationships having a difficulty, or finances are difficult, or physical difficulty, right? And so is the music being used to create integration with the person's whole life, or is it being used as a place to run away from life?
The
And
escapism.
right, yeah, exactly. And so can spirituality, right? We can use it that way as well. So the idea is that each petal engagement brings us back to the center and prevents us from using any of our cultivation practices as a kind of bypassing or escapism,
Beautiful.
which we're all susceptible to.
That's
I'm
part of the
told.
human connection. Yeah, the human condition is like, wait a minute, I don't want to feel that pain. So what can I do to avoid or run away from it, right?
Exactly.
But that's not the path of integrative healing, is it? Because it's going to be there no matter what. So
Exactly.
tell
Yeah.
us more. There's two
Okay.
petals,
So
a
these
home
two,
and a tree. Yeah.
yeah. So the home is the environmental petal. Um, and in the early days of developing this model, I used to call it the domestic or sort of home petal. And what I realized was it's not just the home, it is the environments within which we spend a lot of our time, how we create those environments, and how those environments either support us or inhibit us. So the idea is that the environments where we spend the most amount of time, those are our second physical body. Right. And this is actually a teaching I received from my mom as a young child. And she taught it to me through dream interpretation. She would say, okay, did your dream have to do with your body? And sometimes I say, no, it had to do with the house. Okay, well, the house is your second body. What was going on in the house? Well, this happened and that happened. Well, those things are going on in the house of your consciousness, right? And so your interaction with that space is really important. The way you eat and exercise and sleep for your physical body, the way you keep your space in your house for your environmental body, there's a really strong interaction there. And then your office and your car, wherever you spend a lot of time. And so cultivating that space as if it's your body, that has had an amazing impact on me. And that insight has helped us in the clinic, where sometimes people have really difficult to diagnose, pathologies, and we find something going on in their home space, right? This is, of course, the basis of feng shui and vastu sciences in China. India has a lot to do with this. So that's the environmental petal. And then, of course, as with the model, if we pan out a little bit wider, we're talking about the home or second body, or we could even call it the first body of us all, which is the planet, right?
Yes. Yes.
So is our cultivation reaching out to the level of the planet, right? And does it include where we live and in our home space and go all the way out? And so there's interactivity, relational practice between our home space and the planet. The last one is the ancestral petal. So kind of a tree, seeds, that idea. And in using the word ancestor, the way I learned about this from my Taoist training was that it goes forward and backwards. So ancestors are not just the ones who came before us, who of course gave us these bodies, right? But they're the ancestors who come after us also. And in that way, time is circular. And so even if we don't have literally our genetic material in another body, in other words, we haven't procreated, the ancestral impact of our actions on the planet, our activities, those things that we create, the things that we do and bring to life in our world become ancestors. And so in this way, the idea is to practice in such a way that we create brightness and clarity through our ancestral line, and we can heal ancestral pains forward and backward through engagement, through cultivation inside this ancestral petal. And of course, sometimes a person will come to us with an illness that we realize is largely connected to something going on ancestrally,
Mhm.
right? Whether that's like an emotional pain ancestrally, working with Holocaust survivors, for example, or there's an ancestral pattern of alcoholism or drug abuse or physical abuse. So that can have a big impact on mental health, emotional health, and all through. So that's a way that we engage with a kind of healing where the whole person is considered. And
Mhm.
and that might include doing, Dr. Engel doing blood work and looking at things from that perspective, but it's one piece among a much larger picture. And a lot of this is subjective, right? So the person is sharing their direct experience of being the one in the center here, living that life. And from
Yes.
that, we get a lot of understanding about how to help a person.
Yes.
Mhm.
This, first of all, I just want to highlight how holistic this feels. I love the elements that you've brought, just the name Clearbright. You're talking about the dance between all of these different energies, and just the beauty of the depth of kind of experience through all this. So thank you for sharing that. And what I'm kind of thinking out loud is that I could see us putting the Nine Petals and an explanation of each as a resource on the online resource hub for those that are interested to find out more. And if people want to find you and Dr. Rangel, or understand maybe some practices that are available, because I know accessibility is really big for you, how would one go about and find that? And we'll make sure to include those in the show notes.
Yeah, so two places. One, innatemedicine.com. That's the website for our clinic work. So people can go there. There's a bunch of resources there that people can read and listen to. If people are interested in inquiring about working with us through Innate Medicine, they can inquire through the site, and Dr.
Awesome.
will follow up with them. And also caincarroll.com. That's where I house all the blogs and writings, and people have access to books and the DVD programs, as well as the weekly self-healing class. And everybody's invited to join that. It's an open platform. Those are all donation based. So the way we're doing it now in the last year or so, we founded a 501c3 nonprofit. And so it's a donation based exchange in this way for the classes and also encourage people to engage in that way. The donations go to support Clearbright, and then from that we're creating the programs and things that come.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Cain. And one thing that I know that when we talked in our intake call, I know that you've really been getting into poetry as well. Not getting into it, but expressing so many beautiful things that it seems like words are hard to express, but through poetry, there's like a different language of love. So as we close this out, I'm wondering if you might share with us a poem as we clear this, kind of close out our podcast today. And then we'll do a few collective questions and say our thank yous.
Okay, yeah, I would love to do that. I selected a poem for today that um, it's dear to my heart because it's the poem that Dr. Rangel encountered, that she read, that inspired her to reach out. It's sort of the poem that inspired our connection and collaborative work, and it's a poem dear to my heart. And I selected it because I thought you would enjoy it because of shared experiences of teaching and things that you and I have done. There's some pieces that reminded me of some of the work
Aw,
that you and I have done together. So
thank you.
it,
Honored.
the title is Dark Mystery. And I wrote this in 2017. In her search for light, the sage plunges deep into the dark mystery. She explores the totality of her being and takes complete responsibility for her life. The dynamic of cause and effect remains ever clear in her mind. She is not afraid of what lurks behind the shadows. She has renounced avoidance, integrated light and dark. Accountability is her secret weapon. My life is my own making, she thinks. With this understanding, vital energy returns to the center. Body and mind repair and rejuvenate. Purpose and vigor ignite, and living takes on new meaning. Yet, my life is not my own, she reflects. The ancestors gave me this body. My form is on loan from the cosmos, this flesh, a garment, woven from natural elements. Body belongs to heaven and earth. I cultivate myself to give something back, she exclaims. The guiding light of internal alchemy and true potency of self-transformation is not ultimately to gain personal benefit, but to serve others. To do this, the sage burns destructive habits in the cauldron of awareness, incinerates self-defeating tendencies in the golden red fire hidden deep in the center. The sun never takes a day off from shining, she whispers. My original mind is just like that. With patience and persistence, her practice begins to shine like the sun, and her heart glows like the midnight moon. As she illuminates her own life, the world grows a little bit brighter.
Wow. Beautiful. I just want to give that space. I feel like that was the mic drop moment, Cain. I think that's the way that we close this out. Beautiful. I actually have, that just resonates like a tuning fork in the heart. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your time, your talent, and really look forward to continuing to support you, brother, on this journey and this path. And thank you for all that you do in supporting the community and all of those that are really interested in a deep level of healing on a holistic level. So
Thanks for making this space for me to be here. I really appreciate it, and appreciate all that you do and your work, and appreciate the collaborations, the ongoing collaborations we've had through the years. Yeah.
me too.
You do.
Take care.